I gave advice I wasn't taking. I was, for several years, considered a clear-headed person to talk to about difficult decisions. When people in my life were stuck, in relationships that weren't working, in jobs that had become corrosive, in patterns they could see but couldn't seem to exit, they came to me. I would listen, ask useful questions, and eventually offer an assessment. The assessment was usually direct. Leave the relationship. Change the job. Set the boundary earlier and hold it. The advice was, by most accounts, good. The situation I was not leaving was my own. This is not a small irony. I was aware of it, at some level, throughout the period I am describing. The awareness was not suppressed or hidden from myself, it was present, sometimes even explicitly articulated, and it changed nothing. I continued to give the advice. I continued to not take it. And the gap between the two sustained itself for longer than I can account for with any explanation that flatters my intelligence. The specific situation is not the point. I am less interested in describing what I should have changed than in examining why I didn't change it while simultaneously and accurately advising others to change equivalent things. But I will say enough to make the pattern legible. I was in a work situation that I had correctly identified, in conversations with people close to me, as wrong for me in several fundamental ways. The wrongness was not subtle, it was the kind I was helping other people see when they described their own circumstances. I had named it, analyzed it, and continued to show up to it every day for nearly 3 years. During that same period, I had 2 separate conversations with people I cared about in which I told them, with conviction and specificity, to leave situations less problematic than mine. One of them did leave. The other took longer but eventually did. In both cases the outcome was good, not uncomplicated, but directionally right. In both cases I had been correct. I was correct about them and I was not applying the correctness to myself, and I was doing this consciously enough that I noticed it and did nothing about the noticing. What I eventually understood is that giving advice is a form of knowing that does not require the cost of acting. When I helped someone else see their situation clearly, I was engaging with the relevant understanding, the capacity to identify a pattern, name it accurately, see the mechanism of why it persisted and what it was costing. This engagement felt like cognitive work, and cognitive work on a problem produces a sensation that is not easily distinguishable from progress. It is not progress. It is the knowledge component of change, separated from the action component and presented as sufficient on its own. The knowing without the acting is a complete loop. You identify the problem, you understand it, you articulate it, and the articulation produces a feeling of movement. The feeling of movement substitutes for the movement itself. And because the loop completes, it has a beginning, a middle, and a satisfying end, it does not produce the discomfort that an incomplete loop would produce. The discomfort that might otherwise push you toward action is metabolized by the knowing. The knowing is doing the work of making the discomfort manageable while the situation that is causing the discomfort remains unchanged. Giving advice accelerated this dynamic in a specific way. Every time I helped someone else identify and act on the pattern I was not acting on myself, I was reinforcing my own competence with the knowledge without advancing my own situation by any distance. The competence felt like an asset. It was, in application to my own life, a liability, because it gave the knowing enough texture and weight that it could plausibly stand in for the doing. This is a mechanism worth naming precisely. Intellectual mastery of a problem and behavioral change in response to it are not the same process, do not share the same operating system, and do not substitute for each other in either direction. You can understand something completely and continue to do the thing that contradicts the understanding. The understanding does not automatically migrate into behavior. It requires a separate act of translation, a decision, taken at the level of action rather than thought, to do the thing that the understanding recommends. That decision is not made by the part of the mind that understands. It has to be made by the part that moves. What changed was less a moment of insight than a moment of refusal. I was listening to myself give someone else advice about a situation structurally similar to mine, and something in the internal process simply would not continue. Not guilt, I had visited guilt before without productive result. Something more like a loss of coherence. The advice I was giving was accurate and the life I was describing it from was not consistent with the advice, and maintaining both of those things simultaneously required a kind of cognitive effort that had, in that moment, exceeded what I was willing to spend. I stopped. I left my own situation several months after that, not immediately, because action requires its own preparation and the preparation was real. But the period between the decision to act and the action was months, not years. The years had been spent in the knowing. The months were spent in the doing, which is a different and in some ways more straightforward task. The clarity I had been extending to other people was available to me all along. It had never been absent. What I had been withholding from myself was not the clarity but the permission to be governed by it, to treat my own analysis of my own situation as actionable information rather than as an interesting observation. There is a version of self-knowledge that is very sophisticated and entirely inert. I had been practicing it for 3 years. The person who gives you the clearest advice about your situation is sometimes someone who is not taking equivalent advice about their own. That is not hypocrisy in the simple sense. It is the architecture of how we use understanding, sometimes to move toward change, and sometimes to manage the feeling of being stuck while remaining in the same place. The understanding is not the problem. The problem is treating the understanding as if it were enough. It is not enough. It is the first step of a process whose second step is entirely different in kind, and cannot be completed in the mind. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable, it builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.